Welcome to A Year of War and Peace. I'm your host, Brian E. Denton. A Year of War and Peace is a daily, year-long, chapter-by-chapter reading of and meditation on Leo Tolstoy's epic novel, War and Peace. In these videos and podcasts, you'll be treated to a free reading of one chapter per day of the novel, plus a reflective essay I've written individually tailored to that day's chapter. These readings are offered for free, though if you'd like to support me, you can do so in one of three ways. First, you could purchase my ebook, A Year of War and Peace. It features the entire novel, plus all of my reflective essays, and it's only $2.99 on Amazon.com. You could also become a patron at patreon.com/BrianEDenton. If you sign up there, you'll receive a sonnet once a month, plus a link to an ebook of my collected sonnets. Finally, if you like, you can make a one-time donation to my PayPal account. The email there is brianedenton@gmail.com. You can also use that email to contact me. I'd be happy to hear from you. Your support is greatly appreciated. Today's reading and reflection is on Chapter 224. Chapter 224. The terrible spectacle of the battlefield, covered with dead and wounded, together with the heaviness of his head, and the news that some 20 generals he knew personally had been killed or wounded, and the consciousness of the impotence of his once mighty arm, produced an unexpected impression on Napoleon, who usually liked to look at the killed and wounded, thereby, he considered, testing his strength of mind. This day, the horrible appearance of the battlefield overcame that strength of mind, which he thought constituted his merit and his greatness. He rode hurriedly from the battlefield, and returned to the Shevardino knoll, where he sat on his camp stool, his sallow face swollen and heavy, his eyes dim, his nose red, and his voice hoarse, involuntarily listening, with downcast eyes, to the sounds of the firing. With painful dejection, he awaited the end of this action, in which he regarded himself as a participant, and which he was unable to arrest. A personal human feeling for a brief moment got the better of the artificial phantasm of life he had served for so long. He felt in his own person the sufferings and death he had witnessed on the battlefield. The heaviness of his head and chest reminded him of the possibility of suffering and of death for himself. At that moment he did not desire Moscow, or victory or glory. What need had he for glory anymore? The only thing he wished for was rest, tranquility, and freedom. But when he had been on the Semenovsk heights, the artillery commander had proposed to him to bring several batteries of artillery up to those heights to strengthen the fire on the Russian troops crowded in the Knazno. Napoleon had assented and had given orders that news should be brought to him of the effect those batteries produced. An adjutant came now to inform him that the fire of 200 guns had been concentrated on the Russians, as he had ordered, but that they still held their ground. "Our fire is mowing them down by rows, but still they hold on," said the adjutant. "They want more," said Napoleon in a hoarse voice. "Sire?" asked the adjutant, who had not heard the remark. "They want more," croaked Napoleon, frowning. "Let them have it." Even before he gave that order, the thing he did not desire, and for which he gave the order only because he thought it was expected of him, was being done. And he fell back into the artificial realm of imaginary greatness, and again, as a horse walking a treadmill thinks it is doing something for itself, he submissively fulfilled the cruel, sad, gloomy, and inhumane role predestined for him. And not for that day and hour alone were the mind and conscience darkened of this man on whom the responsibility for what was happening lay more than on all the others who took part in it. Never to the end of his life could he understand goodness, beauty, or truth, or the significance of his actions, which were too contrary to goodness and truth, too remote from everything human, for him ever to grasp their meaning. He could not disavow his actions, belauded as they were by half the world, and so he had to repudiate truth, goodness, and all humanity. Not only on that day, as he rode over the battlefield strewn with men killed and maimed, by his will, as he believed, did he reckon, as he looked at them, how many Russians there were for each Frenchman, and, deceiving himself, find reason for rejoicing in the calculation that there were 5 Russians for every Frenchman. Not on that day alone did he write in a letter to Paris that the battlefield was superb, because 50,000 corpses lay there, but even on the island of St. Helena, in the peaceful solitude where he said he intended to devote his leisure to an account of the great deeds he had done, he wrote, "The Russian war should have been the most popular war of modern times. It was a war of good sense, for real interests, for the tranquility and security of all. It was purely pacific and conservative. It was a war for a great cause, the end of uncertainties and the beginning of security. A new horizon and new labors were opening out, full of well-being and prosperity for all. The European system was already founded. All that remained was to organize it. Satisfied on these great points and with tranquility everywhere, I too should have had my Congress and my Holy Alliance. Those ideas were stolen from me, and that great reunion of sovereigns, we should have discussed our interests like one family, and have rendered account to the peoples as clerk to master. Europe would in this way soon have been in fact but one people, and anyone who traveled anywhere would have found himself always in the common fatherland. I should have demanded the freedom of all navigable rivers for everybody, that the seas should be common to all, and that the great standing army should be reduced henceforth to mere guards for the sovereigns. On returning to France, to the bosom of the great, strong, magnificent, peaceful, and glorious fatherland, I should have proclaimed her frontiers immutable, all future wars purely defensive, all aggrandizement anti-national. I should have associated my son in the empire, my dictatorship would have been finished, and his constitutional reign would have begun. Paris would have been the capital of the world, and the French the envy of the nations. My leisure then, and my old age, would have been devoted, in company with the Empress and during the royal apprenticeship of my son, to leisurely visiting, with our own horses, and like a true country couple, every corner of the empire, receiving complaints, redressing wrongs, and scattering public buildings and benefactions on all sides and everywhere. Napoleon, predestined by Providence for the gloomy role of executioner of the peoples, assured himself that the aim of his actions had been the people's well-being, and that he could control the fate of millions, and by the employment of power, confer benefactions. Of 400,000 who crossed the Vistula, he wrote further of the Russian war, half were Austrians, Prussians, Saxons, Poles, Bavarians, Württembergers, Mecklenburgers, Spaniards, Italians, and Neapolitans. The imperial army, strictly speaking, was 1/3 composed of Dutch, Belgians, men from the borders of the Rhine, Piedmontese, Swiss, Genevese, Tuscans, Romans, inhabitants of the 32nd Military Division of Bremen, of Hamburg, and so on. It included scarcely 140,000 who spoke French. The Russian expedition actually cost France less than 50,000 men. The Russian army, in its retreat from Vilna to Moscow, lost in various battles 4 times more men than the French army. The burning of Moscow cost the lives of 100,000 Russians who died of cold and want in the woods. Finally, and its march from Moscow to the order of the Russian army also suffered from the severity of the season, so that by the time it reached Vilna it numbered only 50,000, and at Kalisz less than 18,000. He imagined that the war with Russia came about by his will, and the horrors that occurred did not stagger his soul. He boldly took the whole responsibility for what happened, and his darkened mind found justification in the belief that among the hundreds of thousands who perished, there were fewer Frenchmen than Hessians and Bavarians. That concludes my reading of chapter 224. I will now proceed to my reflection on the same. A Year of War and Peace, day 224. 50,000 corpses lay there. This heart within me burns. And I had done a hellish thing, and it would work 'em woe. So says Coleridge's Ancient Mariner to a captive wedding guest in what is surely literary history's most bizarre social stop and chat. The rhyme of the Ancient Mariner is worth listening to because it teaches us about the self-damage done by self-deception. The Ancient Mariner's tale is a simple enough story. It begins with a sea journey through Antarctic waters icy enough to warm the hearts of House Stark, but chill the hopes of survival of everybody else. Indeed, at just the point where his ship is doomed to perish among the halting glaciers, an albatross drops from the heavens and leads the ship to open waters. In return for this help, the mariner, naturally, shoots and kills the albatross. Fair enough. But when things break bad for the ship again, this time killing off the entire crew, the Ancient Mariner plunges into a lifetime of remorse and guilt. He convinces himself that his action, murdering the albatross, is what killed his crew, rather than, the perils of 19th century deep sea voyaging in the Antarctic. Clearly, the poaching of an albatross has no relation to the fate of a ship at sea. Other forces are at work here. The ancient mariner, however, believes his own action is central to the fate of other men. In today's chapter, Napoleon displays a similar self-aggrandizing impulse. There are differences between the two, of course. The ancient mariner's self-deception leads him to falsely assume responsibility for his crewmates' destruction. Napoleon's self-deception, on the other hand, helps him disavow responsibility for the carnage he causes. Nevertheless, this internal crookery ultimately corrupts his soul. Throughout the chapter, Napoleon is either horrified at what he has done, or he is dark and gloomy over the erroneous conviction that he must do them. This chapter starts with Napoleon taking a horrified survey of the gruesome battlefield. He cannot believe what he sees. The massacre is too much to process. At that moment, Tolstoy writes, he did not desire Moscow, or victory, or glory. What need had he for more glory? The one thing he wished for was rest, tranquility, and freedom. In this brief moment, Napoleon emerges temporarily from his false consciousness and assumes a human perspective. The moment doesn't last too long. When he sees that the Russians hold out against the intense French cannon fire, he becomes angry and orders even more fire to rain down upon his enemies. It's at this point that his mind transitions from horrified to dark and gloomy, a sad state, Tolstoy says. He is never able to escape. As he watches the destruction of his own making unfold on the battlefield below, he repudiates all truth, goodness, and humanity. Napoleon justifies these terrible crimes as cheap expenditure necessary for the purchase of a unified Europe. It's for the people's welfare, you see, that he's scorching a march through the continent and peppering so many bodies with deadly gunshot. And besides, when he looks at the dead, there's like 5-to-1 enemy to French casualty rate anyway. C'est la vie, homie. The difference between Coleridge's Ancient Mariner and Tolstoy's Napoleon is that Napoleon actually works some woe. What emerges from both Coleridge's poem and Tolstoy's portrait of Napoleon, however, is the power a self-deceived mind exercises over an individual's spiritual well-being. The Ancient Mariner needlessly punishes himself and commits to a lifetime of repeatedly sharing his tale with others as an act of penance. Napoleon submits to the cruel, sad, gloomy, and inhumane role of war criminal because he has tricked himself into believing that what he's doing is for the benefit of humanity. In both cases, the men unsettle themselves. Daily meditation. No man is damaged by an action which is not his own. Epictetus, The Discourses. All right, that concludes my reading of and reflection on chapter 224 of War and Peace. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks so much for joining me today. Remember that if you'd like to support me, you can do so either by purchasing the ebook, A Year of War and Peace, becoming a patron at patreon.com, or making a one-time donation at PayPal. Links to all that are down below in the show notes. Tomorrow, we're going to be reading and reflecting on chapter 225. I hope you'll join me. Until then, take care of yourselves and others.